And here we'll make use of the quadratic formula again to solve this equation. And so since we already have that 0 on one side, we're ready to identify A, B, and C. Our A is that number part attached to the x squared. Since there's no number written there, there's an understood 1 that we have. It's 1x squared. So our A is 1. A, B, and C are always going to be numbers. They'll never include variables. So we don't want to make it an x or an x squared. It's just that number part. So the B is -2 and the C is +2. So let's go ahead and plug those into our quadratic formula. So x is -b. Since b is -2, that means we have -2. Or you can just think of it as the opposite of -2, which is +2. Plus or minus the square root of, now the b squared, again we want to be careful that we're putting that in parentheses and squaring it, because that way we get a +4, not a -4. And you especially need to be careful there if you're just typing the entire expression into your calculator. If you don't use parentheses, then it's going to compute it incorrectly. So we get our -4 times A times C, and put it all over 2A. Now let's just go ahead and simplify, again starting with the expression inside that square root. So out in front here we have +2. We got to make sure that we simplify our square root part completely before we start canceling. So inside that square root we have 4 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 2 is 8 over 2. So that's a 2 plus or minus the square root of -4. So 4 minus 8 is -4. Now that we see that square root of a negative, the very first thing we need to do there is write it in terms of I. So that square root of -4 is written as I square root of 4. That negative comes out as I. And then we can evaluate square root of 4, that's 2. So we have 2 plus or minus 2I over 2. Now 2 goes into everything, so we can simplify this, or you can think of it as just dividing each term on top by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1I. So our two solutions there are x equals 1 plus I and x equals 1 minus I. Or we can just write that as x equals 1 plus or minus I.